Are you guys ready? All right, the subcommittee will come to order. Today's hearing is on the Treasury Department's continued approval of excessive pay for executives at companies that are currently being funded by the taxpayer. I want to welcome our witnesses today. Thank you for being here. As I mentioned to you just a few minutes ago, we'll try to be done by noon, hopefully a little earlier if we can. But it's an important hearing, and you got to listen to us give a few statements before you get to talk. It's just sort of the way this thing goes. So I'll do an opening statement, then the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Cartwright, will do his, and then we'll hear from you all. You get 5 minutes to give your testimony, and then we'll get right into questions. Today's hearing is about understanding why the Treasury Department continues to abdicate its responsibility to taxpayers, breaking a firm promise our President Obama, made to the American people. In 2009, when it was discovered that executives at bailed-out firms were enriching themselves on the backs of taxpayer support, the President went on national television and stated that these actions were the height of irresponsibility and declared them shameful. He said he would not tolerate it as President. To remedy the situation, he promised top executives at firms receiving extraordinary help from U.S. taxpayers will have their compensation capped at $500,000, a fraction of the salaries that they had been reported. The person currently in charge of enforcing these restrictions is with us today, Ms. Patricia Gagan. She is the Acting Special Master for TARP Executive Compensation, is responsible for approving compensation at firms that have been given extraordinary assistance from the Federal Government. The latest audit from the the Special Inspector General for TARP shows that compensation for executives at bailed-out firms is egregiously out of line with what the President committed to the American people. Of the 69 executives for whom the Special Master Gagan had responsibility to approve compensation, all but one received pay of $1 million. In fact, 16 of these executives were paid over $5 million. We are here today to fulfill the committee's mission of bringing transparency and accountability to the American people. Treasury's failure to protect taxpayers is part of a disturbing pattern in which this administration makes promises to the public but then does not live up to them. We saw it with the stimulus. We were promised unemployment would never exceed 8%, and it exceeded 10%. We saw it with Obamacare. The President said premiums would go down, and they've gone up. When the President promises do not materialize, he and his administration simply stick their heads in the ground and offer little to the American people by way of answers. Hopefully this morning, Special Master Gagan can explain to us how things got so out of control and provide a plan to correct executive compensation for firms that continue to operate with taxpayer support. And with that, I would yield to the gentleman from Pennsylvania for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank our witnesses for appearing before the committee today. I look forward to hearing your testimony on the executive compensation at companies that received exceptional taxpayer assistance during the government's response to the 2008 financial crisis. Like most Americans, I was troubled to learn how the structure of compensation packages on Wall Street helped to create incentives for taking the unnecessary and excessive risks that led to the financial crisis in the first place. Too often, executives received huge cash salaries, discretionary raises, exorbitant bonuses, and golden parachutes, with little to no reason to care about their behavior's effect on the long-term consequences to the company and the country, because their compensation wasn't tied to the long-term health of the company. With the economy collapsing, the taxpayers bailed out these companies, not because we wanted to, but because we had to. Millions of middle-class jobs, blue-collar manufacturing jobs, would have been gone. Millions of people out of work, through no fault of their own, just because a bunch of traders on Wall Street didn't feel the need to think about the long-term consequences of their actions. This was hard to stomach when the taxpayers who saved these companies are often struggling themselves to make ends meet. But it was a necessary thing to do, and the right thing to do, to save the jobs of millions of innocent middle-class people who had nothing to do with causing that financial crisis in the first place. With these bailouts came conditions, and rightly so, One of the many conditions was that the Treasury Department would appoint someone to oversee executive compensation at these companies. This compensation was to be structured in a way that would incentivize long-term growth over risk-taking and personal gain, and most importantly, get these companies back on their feet again by attracting and retaining quality employees that would keep these jobs safe so that they're able to pay back the taxpayers as quickly as possible. TARP has been overall a success story. According to the Treasury Department, as of January 31, 2013, Treasury has recovered all or substantially all of TARP funds dispersed to date. 4 of the 7 companies we're talking about today to receive the most TARP funds have already paid us back and exited the program. Now, I'd like to point out here a great irony that we will see in this room today. The same people who argued that they would rather have gone over the fiscal cliff because a 4.6% increase in taxes on the wealthiest 0.7% in our nation would destroy the economy are the same people who are now saying that these specific 0.7%ers are making too much money. Now, I know we will be getting into the minutia today, and I welcome that discussion. However, it's important to recognize the big picture here. We held our noses. We bailed out these companies so that millions of middle-class jobs wouldn't be lost. This program was an overall success, and millions of people are employed in this country who otherwise wouldn't have been. I thank the Chairman for calling this hearing, and I look forward to a productive dialogue on these issues. I yield.
I thank the gentleman. I would just point out that this hearing is about following the law and about an administration keeping their word. They told us one thing. In fact, we're going to play what the President said, and we have statements. They said they were going to limit compensation, that it would be the rare and it would be the exception for executives who are receiving taxpayer dollars to go above $500,000 in compensation, and that has been anything but that. So this is about following the law and having this administration do exactly what they told the American taxpayers they were going to do when the American taxpayers ponied up the money for these various companies. And with that, I would yield to the Chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be very, very brief. And I think the ranking member will recognize that in this particular case, we agree on what excess compensation is, and perhaps for a reason that you didn't note. To quote President Barack Obama, if you've got a business, you didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen. Now, that quote doesn't ring particularly true to me as an entrepreneur and a job creator, but it rings very true when it comes to General Motors and other companies who still owe us their very existence depending upon the Federal relief, a bailout for which, in the case of General Motors, we're still about $20 billion upside down. And I repeat, you don't take a bonus when, in fact, your investors are in the negative. That's what we're talking about here today. I think that's exactly where we have to be. And I note that the Chairman and Ranking Member together noted that not every company that's on this excess compensation list fits that bill. And I hope that we will concentrate on companies who were not able to exit TARP because, in fact, they have not paid us back. Once they exit TARP, I am one of those people who believes that it's up to the Board of Directors and the stockholders to determine compensation, and I really am willing to support whatever they support as the owners of the company. But today, America is a major owner of the company, and ultimately, without the United States Treasury, there would be no General Motors and several other companies. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the committee wishing to make an opening statement? All right. Members have 7 days to submit opening statements for the record. We will now recognize our panel. We are pleased to have with us the Honorable Christy Romero, who is the Special Inspector General for the Troubled Asset Relief Program, and Ms. Patricia Gagan is Acting Special Master for TARP Executive Compensation. Ladies, I need you to stand up, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Let the record show that the witnesses answered in the Affirmative, and we will just start with Ms. Romero. You will be given, you get 5 minutes, more or less, and then we'll go right to Ms. Gagan. And Ms. Romero, again, thank you for being here, and you're recognized for your 5 minutes.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Cartwright, Chairman Issa, and members of the committee, it's my honor to present SIG-TARP's report. I thank the committee for bringing transparency and oversight to this use of taxpayer dollars. Executive compensation did play a material role in causing the financial crisis. Pay was not tied to long-term performance. Employees took too much risk in the short term, and eventually that caught up with them. The companies would have failed, but taxpayers saved them with the bailout. Taxpayers stepped up because we were told that the entire economy would collapse. The bailout was supposed to protect taxpayers, not line the pockets of executives. After TARP companies paid huge bonuses, the President announced reforms. For 7 companies receiving extraordinary bailouts, executive compensation would be capped at $500,000, with anything additional paid in stock that can't be cashed until taxpayers are repaid. Treasury's Office of the Special Master determines each person's pay within the top 25 employees at these companies under 6 Treasury principles that are vague, conflicting, and so broad that almost any pay could be justified. Former Special Master Feinberg developed guidelines in the public's interest to balance the conflicting principles, give incentives to repay, and address mistakes of the past. And he testified before Congress that they were, first, and I quote, pay should generally not exceed the 50th percentile, end quote, meaning pay that's right in the middle. Second, quote, cash salaries should rarely exceed $500,000 and should be in many cases well under, end quote. And third, incentive pay should be tied to long-term performance metrics and only cashed out as TARP is repaid. SIG-TARP found in our first report that the Special Master reduced pay from pre-bailout times, but approved pay worth millions. The Special Master lacked strong criteria, policies, and procedures to apply its guidelines, and ended up making many exceptions when companies pushed back, claiming they were unique and needed the pay for retention. That's the same argument that Fannie and Freddie made. In 2012, we did a follow-up. We found that Treasury made no meaningful reforms on our recommendations. Treasury approved excessive pay at AIG, GM, and Ally that exceeded its own guidelines, chipping away at the important changes that Mr. Feinberg had made, largely based on what the companies wanted. Every employee except one was paid $1 million. Many were paid much more. Half were paid $3 million or more. 1/4 were paid $5 million or more. Treasury approved 2/3 of these employees to be paid above the 50th percentile, meaning they got pay not at the middle of the pack, but above that. The companies wanted raises for 18 employees, and that's what they got, ranging from $30,000 to a $1 million pay raise. There was no criteria for who would get a raise. Employees got raises at companies with profits, companies at losses, and even a company in bankruptcy. There was no criteria for who would be paid cash salaries over $500,000. 70% were paid cash of $500,000 or more. 94% were paid $450,000 or more in cash. For half of the employees, Treasury removed long-term restricted stock, removing pay that's tied to individual performance and that gives the employee a personal stake in the company repaying TARP. Treasury claims they're not bound by their guidelines, but we found too many exceptions to the guidelines to make the guidelines meaningful. Treasury has to be held to the standards they create and under which they make decisions. It's necessary for transparency, consistency, and oversight. It should be a bare minimum to reduce pay from the ridiculous, out-of-control pre-bailout pay. The question is not how much should these employees be paid if it was business as usual. It's not business as usual. Taxpayers own part of these companies. The question is, what is the appropriate size of pay given the taxpayer ownership, and how should that pay be structured to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past? Mr. Feinberg said that the answer was in his guidelines. If Treasury does not follow the guidelines, taxpayers will subsidize excessive pay, and Treasury risks turning back the clock to the compensation that contributed to the financial crisis. Thank you again, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Romero. We appreciate that. Ms. Gagan, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Cartwright, Chairman Issa, and members of the subcommittee. I thank you for the opportunity to testify today on this important topic. My name is Patricia Gagan, and I serve as the Acting Special Master for TARP Executive Compensation. In the fall of 2008, our economy stood at the brink. The financial institutions and markets that Americans rely on to protect our savings, finance our homes and college educations, and fund our businesses were threatened as at no time since the Great Depression. Congress acted by passing the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act, which created TARP and included important restrictions on executive compensation at businesses that received TARP assistance. Those restrictions were designed to ensure that compensation of top executives was aligned not only with the interests of shareholders, but also with the interests of taxpayers in preventing excessive risk-taking and in recovering TARP assistance. Treasury acted quickly to implement these restrictions through a regulation that, among other things, created the Office of the Special Master. Established in June 2009 under the leadership of Kenneth Feinberg, the responsibility of the office is each year to review and either approve or modify the pay packages proposed for the top 25 employees of the 7 companies that had received exceptional assistance under TARP. The Special Master has no jurisdiction to review pay packages at any other companies. All our determination letters are available publicly on our website. As Mr. Feinberg noted almost 4 years ago before the full committee, the office has worked to achieve a balance between limiting compensation while at the same time keeping pay at levels that enable the exceptional assistance companies to remain competitive and repay taxpayers. The regulation makes clear that we must consider market forces in determining pay levels. In implementing the regulation, we established a number of guidelines that were the foundation of the initial determinations. These guidelines are not rigid formulas. Each pay determination requires the exercise of discretion and judgment that takes into account the specific facts and circumstances of each company and each employee. A careful look at our record shows that the office has struck an appropriate balance. Pay has been cut and taxpayers are being repaid. Starting in 2009, we cut average cash pay for the top 25 executives at the 7 companies by more than 90% and average total pay by more than 50%. Taken together, the original 7 companies under the jurisdiction of the Special Master have returned the $352 billion in total assistance provided, plus an additional positive return to date of more than $6 billion. For the 2012 determinations, we followed the same guidelines established by Mr. Feinberg in 2009. We continue to review and evaluate market data to make sure that pay does not exceed the levels paid for similar positions at similar companies. In 2012, AIG's average pay packages for its top 25 employees were at the 48th percentile compared to similar positions at similar companies. GMs were at the 50th percentile, and Ally Financials were midway between the 50th and the 75th percentiles. We continue to require that most pay be in the form of stock, the ultimate value of which will reflect the performance of the company. 94% of the pay packages we approved in 2012 contained a majority of stock rather than cash, up from 74% in 2010. We continue to limit cash salary. In 2012, the average total cash pay approved for AIG, GM, and Ally Financial was 63% lower than the median for total cash pay for similar positions at similar companies. We continue to require that incentive pay be awarded only on the achievement of pre-established performance goals, and we continue to limit perks. Today, TARP is in wind down. In December 2012, AIG exited TARP. Thus, only 2 companies, GM and Ally Financial, remain under the jurisdiction of the office. And for these companies, we will continue to follow the framework and guidelines we have used for the 2009 through 2012 determinations until they have exited TARP. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Gagan. Now turn to gentleman from California for 5 minutes.
I appreciate that. Would you play the short video?
For top executives to award themselves these kinds of compensation packages in the midst of this economic crisis isn't just bad taste, it's bad strategy, and I will not tolerate it as president. We're going to be demanding some restraint in exchange for federal aid, so that when firms seek new federal dollars, we won't find them up to the same old tricks. As part of the reforms we're announcing today, top executives at firms receiving extraordinary help from U.S. taxpayers will have their compensation capped at $500,000, a fraction of the salaries that have been reported recently.
Ms. Kagan, did you fully live up to the words that the President said in that speech?
Chairman Issa?
Could you pull the microphone a little closer?
Chairman Issa, if you recall, after the President's speech, Congress amended Issa.
Okay, so, and since my name is normally pronounced Issa, I'll interrupt at this moment. I agree. The statute does not exactly match the President's statement. So let's get into what the statute is supposed to do. You're authorized to provide such compensation, and I've done executive compensation actually greater than the $10 million that we're talking about for the top. You're authorized to get them effectively to the median, but you're also required to have a deferral. They're not allowed to receive it all in cash. Is that essentially what a layperson would think about the law relative to GM and the old GMAC, which are the only two entities we're talking about really here today?
Chairman Issa, I agree. Our two main guidelines would be to make sure that the compensation does not exceed the levels paid for similar positions at similar companies on the one hand, and we want to make sure that most of the compensation is in the form of stock so that it's paid over time and reflects the performance of the company over time, so that the executives are not encouraged to look at short-term results and are not encouraged to take excessive risks.
And if you're an executive making $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, the truth is it's not a negative, it's a positive to receive your compensation on a deferred basis. Correct? In other words, companies routinely do not pay their top executives in large amounts of cash. Just the opposite. Executives typically want a deferred compensation package, and many of the compensation that top executives get are in non-cash deferred systems, including their pensions and so on. Isn't that true?
Chairman Issa, that's correct. In our case, however, the cash portion of the packages is a much smaller portion than is normal for similar positions at similar companies.
Well, I took the opportunity to look at General Motors' chief competitor, Ford. And when you look at Ford, it outperformed GM. When you look at the total compensation, I found it to be substantially similar. The difference is Ford has much lower debt, owes the government nothing, is in fact competing against General Motors, who got a bailout. Isn't that correct?
Generally speaking, I believe that you're correct in describing their compensation.
And because America chose, or the Treasury chose to have a substantial portion of that bailout in stock, it's particularly significant because it doesn't appear as debt on the balance sheet, but rather stock that is currently underwater by about $20 billion, right? More or less.
The stock that we own at current market prices is not sufficient for GM to repay us fully. That's correct.
Well, let's understand something. General Motors is a public company, so we've lost that much money. If we take that money and we sell it and we put it into Apple or we put it into gold futures or anything else, we may or may not make money. The truth is, today we have lost that much money, and the only way we get it back is through stock appreciation, correct?
It is true that the only way we will get the remaining investment in GM is through the value of our stock. That's correct,
Okay.
Chairman Issa.
Now, I've sat on the board of a public company, even as a member of Congress, and I'm very sensitive to what moves the value of stock. Since your compensation package was deferred almost not at all, in other words, they vest in 3-year increments, a third, a third, and a third, can you sit here today and tell the rest of us who do not always deal in these kinds of things that they're really linked to the long-term future? Long-term future Is next year, the year after, and the year after long-term, or is in fact 3 years after the bailout, or 6 years after the bailout nearly, is it in fact really long-term, or are we dealing with a relatively short horizon, one in which the CEO, for example, is likely to still be the CEO or barely exiting? That is the question I really have for you here today. It is not the total compensation, which I have some concerns about whether it is fair based on their performance relative to their peer who did not have the assistance. But even if it was reasonable, why wouldn't that compensation, the so-called TARP stock, be more linked to us getting out of the red on that very stock?
Chairman Issa, the task that the Office of the Special Master has under the law is to achieve a balance between limiting compensation on the one hand.
Well, my time has expired, but maybe because you are not exactly answering the question, if you could simply say, did you have the authority to go beyond a third, and a third? Not could you exercise it, did you choose to, but did you have the authority to have their compensation further out and more linked to the long-term performance than you did?
Chairman Issa, we did select 3 years as the appropriate long-term measure.
I appreciate that you selected it. And, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member, if you give me a little indulgence, did you have the authority to have their compensation more linked to where the company would be when it exits, us being on the hook and upside down and currently having lost potentially forever our investment? Did you have the authority to make it longer than essentially a third of it maturing in 1 year?
Chairman Issa, we could have made it longer and we could have made it shorter. You are correct.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, hopefully I have set the stage a little bit for one of my concerns today is exercise of authority. Was it reasonable? Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, one thing that we've been doing so far is referring liberally to the statements and opinions of Mr. Kenneth Feinberg. And one thing I'd like to do, since a lot of those statements and opinions were made, he came out with a book called Who Gets What? Fair Compensation After Tragedy and Financial Upheaval in 2012. And I would like to submit for the record, not the entire book, Mr. Chairman, but
we too have a budget.
Chapter 5 of that book, which runs from pages 85 through 123.
Without objection.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Romero, I want to thank you for your work and your testimony today. I appreciate the work that SIGTARP does. Ms. Gagan, I also want to thank you for your work and your testimony. Now, Congress required the Treasury prohibit bonus payments and retention awards for companies receiving exceptional assistance under TARP. Ms. Romero, do you have any indication at this point that Treasury failed to do that?
So the cuts that Ms. Gagan was referring to in her earlier testimony, there were definitely cuts made in 2009 from the pre-bailout time. Much of that cut actually comes from Congress prohibiting those cash bonuses and that compensation.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, Ms. Gagan, have you done that? Have you cut prohibited bonus payments and retention awards?
The statute has a small has the opportunity to provide for incentive compensation up to 1/3 of the total package, and it's only permitted in the form of long-term restricted stock.
As you said.
And we do permit long-term restricted stock strictly in accordance with what the statute permits.
All right. Now, Congress also required that Treasury prohibit golden parachutes or exorbitant departure payments to senior executives. Ms. Gagan, have you done that?
Yes, the golden parachutes are prohibited for the top 10 executives at all TARP recipients.
Okay. And back to you, Ms. Romero. Do you have any indication that Treasury has failed to do that?
Golden parachutes, no.
Okay. Now, in the statute, despite whatever video clips we want to show people, Congress did not include a specific dollar limit to impose on individual executives. Now, Ms. Gagan, tell us, what considerations are you required to weigh under the law?
Under the law, The specific principle in the Treasury regulations, Congressman Cartwright, states that compensation should be consistent with and not excessive, taking into account amounts paid for similar positions at similar companies.
Okay. Well, I think it's fairly clear that Treasury has upheld the law that Congress passed on limiting executive compensation of companies receiving assistance from TARP. Still, the SIG-TARP report calls into question the decisions the Special Master made when approving or modifying executive compensation. Ms. Gagan, how do you evaluate executive compensation proposals from the companies that you oversee? Do you look at data? Do you conduct interviews?
In performing our task of the balance between limiting compensation and making sure that the companies have sufficient pay to remain competitive and to repay taxpayers, we look at a lot of information. We gather an enormous amount of market data. We have on staff executive professionals who have years of experience in the area, executive compensation professionals who have years of experience in the area, and they help us evaluate the market data, gather it, and decide where the pay proposals that the companies have given us fall within that range.
Okay.
By no means do we approve every compensation package that's put in front of us.
I understand that. And my last question is, when considering a company's proposal to pay an individual executive a cash salary in excess of $500,000, which is allowed under your office's guidelines for quote-unquote good cause, what analysis does the Office of Special Master conduct to determine whether or not there is in fact good cause?
Congressman Cartwright, we look at the facts and circumstances of the company and of the individual. We look at that individual's responsibilities. We look at where the cash salary of that individual falls, comparing it to amounts paid for similar positions at similar companies. And in fact, in our 2012 pay packages, our total cash for the pay packages that we approved was overall 63% lower than median for similar positions at similar companies. So we have definitely followed our guideline of restricting cash pay.
Thank you, Ms. Gagan. My time's up.
Thank the gentleman. I'll recognize the gentleman from Michigan for 5 minutes, Mr. Benivolio.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Cartwright, thank you for holding this important hearing. Billions of dollars of taxpayer money have been used to bail out companies that were failing largely due to their own poor decisions. Taxpayer money should not be used to enrich the executives of these companies. And I remember a long time ago, a teacher told me that I don't care how talented you are, how smart you are, there's always somebody a little bit better. And our importance to any organization is directly proportional to the hole you leave when you take your hand out of a bucket of water. And what I don't understand is how we can do this, reward people for failure. But my question is for Ms. Romero. SIG-TARP has admitted that increased moral hazard had been a byproduct of TARP. Thus far, the Dodd-Frank Act has also failed to have solved the perception problem that the markets expect large institutions to receive government support if they falter. By accepting company requests for salaries above prescribed limits, the Office of the Special Master has set a precedent that may encourage future companies to seek bailouts. Does SIG-TARP believe that increased moral hazard is a byproduct of the bailout?
Absolutely.
By relinquishing its pay-setting authorities to bail out companies, do you think Treasury has potentially incentivized other companies to seek bailouts in the future?
Absolutely, even the companies who are still in. It shouldn't be comfortable or luxurious to be in TARP. You want it to be uncomfortable, so there's an incentive to get out and to never ask to get back in again.
Is it true, as noted in footnote 4 of your recent audit, that Citicorp and Bank of America exited TARP so quickly in part not to have to follow OSM's pay restrictions?
Yes.
In your opinion, what does this entire experience say about the Federal Government's involvement in making pay decisions for private companies?
Well, I think whether it's required by law or rule, Treasury didn't actually implement TARP through law. For example, there's nothing in any law or any Treasury rule related to Treasury standards it follows for cash injections in banks, which is most of TARP. So when Treasury sets guidelines, they've got to follow them. And the guidelines are really important here. The guidelines actually protect the public. And without them, the balance shifts to what the companies want, and that's very dangerous.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Gentleman from, whatever the boss tells me here, what, Mr. Carter? Oh, we're going, Mr. Davis. All right. Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you for calling this hearing. I also want to thank our witnesses for coming and for sharing their expressions with us. Like many of my colleagues, in several instances, I voted to help find a solution and a direction to what I consider to be a very serious financial crisis that we were facing, and the seriousness that some of our companies were having difficulty making it. I'm also pleased that when we look at what has been the success of some of them, where they were able to turn around their businesses. But like many Americans, I didn't vote to line the pockets of any executives or to provide bonuses where it didn't appear to me that bonuses were warranted. So just to try and make sure that my assessment is fair, when I look at your efforts to limit executive compensation, while also considering the ability of TARP recipients to perform as stable enterprises, let me ask you, Ms. Gagan, in a letter received by the committee just this morning, the former TARP Special Master Ken Feinberg wrote, and I'm quoting, "The market and economy have changed since the office of the Special Master was established. The instability of the market and the economic recession posed particular problems for the Special Master when it came to calculating compensation in individual cases. Today, the market and Wall Street-related competitive compensation are much different than they were when I was the Special Master. Wall Street-related executive compensation has increased since 2009. Accordingly, compensation decisions made by the Special Master must take into account this fact in making individual compensation decisions that will assure ongoing competitiveness in the marketplace. The initial pay prescriptions promulgated during my tenure may still be valid and credible, but waivers and exceptions are to be more frequent and expected in light of changing markets." End of quote. Would you respond to that statement, or would you agree?
Congressman Davis, thank you for the opportunity to address that statement. I certainly would in general agree with what my predecessor, Ken Feinberg, says about current compensation. Nevertheless, the Office of the Special Master adheres very closely to the same principles we've always followed and our guidelines. We believe that we are following all the guidelines that were initially established, and we don't believe that we have issued additional waivers or have increased in general the level of compensation. We have looked to make sure that the compensation is consistent with market practice. We have limited cash. We have made sure that incentive compensation is awarded only on the basis of pre-established performance goals. We have made sure that all the packages, as many as we can get, are mainly in the form of stock. In fact, 94% of our pay packages in 2012 were majority stock up from 74% in 2010. So while I appreciate Mr. Feinberg's view on the economy as a whole and where Wall Street compensation has gone, the fact is that we have remained extremely careful in limiting compensation. That's the balance we have to achieve. We limit compensation while at the same time permitting the companies to have pay levels that will keep them competitive so that they can succeed. And I don't believe that we should think about the companies as if they're failing. These companies are succeeding.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Ms. Romero, when Mr. Benevolio was asking his questions, he talked about the moral hazard, and you mentioned uncomfortable. We should make these companies feel uncomfortable so that there's not this incentive to take taxpayer money. How many pay packages did the special master look at last year?
69.
69. And the way it works, the companies send those, they send in what they would like to pay their executives, and then Ms. Gagan gives it the thumbs up or the thumbs down. How many of those 69 did the special master turn down?
Not that many. I mean, what we found was the pay that they got was largely based on what they had.
So 69 executives asked to be paid a certain amount. They didn't they didn't change any of them?
I think they made some changes, but they gave 18 of 18 pay raises that were requested, $30,000 to $1 million without looking at them. You look at these pay raises, only 4 of them are under $100,000. You see like $650,000 pay raise, $200,000 pay raise, even where the company's taking a loss, $100,000 pay raise.
So not exactly making these guys sweat, right?
No.
Yeah, and I read through your testimony last night. I mean, I just wanted to, I mean, at some point I got asked, like, do you feel like you're pulling your hair out? I saw on page 9 you talk about, despite SIGTARP's January 2012 report identifying serious concerns with the special master's pay setting process, Treasury continued to use the same process for setting 2012 pay without significant change. Then you said on the next page, SIGTARP previously warned that Treasury lacked robust criteria, policies, procedures to ensure these guidelines are met. Treasury made no meaningful reform to its processes. And I look at page 12. Treasury did not establish any meaningful criteria for having good cause to award cash salaries greater than $500,000. Page 18. Finally, you said the second report by SIGTARP to warn the Office of the Special Master after 4 years still does not have robust policies, procedure, criteria to ensure that pay for executive TARP exceptional assistance complies. Our company stays within the OSM guidelines. So, I mean, it's how many times do you have to tell them, like, put in place some policies that actually make some sense?
That's why this hearing is so important. I mean, if we talk about say on pay, the taxpayers get a say on pay too. If we own part of the company, we speak through the special master.
And I think even in your opening remarks, I jotted this down, you said they haven't even held to the standards they created. So it's not only that they need better policies, but what policies they do have, they haven't even followed those in the course of this process. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And now, Ms. Gagan, you cite in 2009, you actually had the executives, you cut their pay. Well, of course you cut their pay. That's the year they got all the money. That's the year they come to the taxpayers hat in hand saying we need money. Well, I hope their pay was cut then. They're living off the taxpayers then. So to use that as the standard for, well, we've made these folks uncomfortable, I would argue it's a lot less about what happened in 2009 and what has happened since 2009. And since 2009, if my numbers are correct, Mr. Feinberg in 2009 only approved executive pay compensation above $500,000 for 6 of, and at that point we had 7 companies in the program. And I think when he approved 6 of those, we were focusing on 5 companies who were in the exceptional assistance category. Only 6 of those individuals received pay above $500,000. Today, what's that number, Ms. Gagan?
In 2012, Chairman Jordan, 23 individuals.
So it went, wait. So it went from 6 to 23?
Well, in 2012, we approved 1 additional pay package over the amount.
No. But in 2009, it was 6, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And how many companies were you looking at in 2009?
In 2009, it was 7 companies.
All right. And today, it's how many companies, how many executive pay packages are above $500,000? 23.
In our 2012 determinations, there are 23 above $500,000 cash salaries, which is 1 more than the amount in 2011 and 1 more than the amount in 2010.
But I'm going from where we started, 2009, 6 above $500,000, and today it's how many?
Today it's 23.
Okay, and how many companies were you evaluating in 2009?
In 2009, there were 7.
And how many companies are you evaluating today?
In 2012, we evaluated 3 companies.
So only 6 above $500,000 in 2009 when you were looking at 7 companies. That's 25 executives that you can look at each company. Only 6 out of all 7 of those companies. And today, when you got 3 companies, you got 23.
Chairman Jordan.
And now let me ask about the one company I think I'm correct with ResCap. The one company's gone bankrupt. Is that right?
Chairman Jordan, first of all, I do want to
Have they filed for bankruptcy?
I want to clarify one point.
Have they filed for bankruptcy?
Ally Financial has not filed for bankruptcy.
ResCap. I ask.
They have a mortgage subsidiary as one of their strategic steps in our investment in Ally Financial is at the parent
Has
level.
ResCap filed for bankruptcy?
They have done a Chapter 11 proceeding.
And is the head of ResCap, Mr. Marino, is he one of those 23 receiving compensation over $500,000?
Cash salary, I'm afraid, Chairman Jordan, I don't feel that I can address specific pay packages for specific individuals.
We have that information. It says he is. He says he's one of the 23. So now think about, so here's what the taxpayer sees. And think about it in the context of what Ms. Romero said. We want to make this uncomfortable because we got taxpayer money at risk. So in 2009, 6 executives, when you're looking at 7 different companies, received pay above $500,000. Today, you're looking at 3 companies, and you got 23 executives receiving pay above that threshold. And one of those individuals at one of those companies, ResCap, is going bankrupt, and yet he's still one of the 23. Do you think the taxpayers are a little nervous about that? And back to Ms. Romero's point, do you think that's making these folks uncomfortable?
Chairman Jordan, I understand that the American people.
And when you look at the pattern of 69 folks you evaluated and you didn't turn down any of them, you take what the company tells you. They offer, here's what we'd like to pay our executives. All right, that's fine. Check the box. That's fine.
Chairman Jordan, by no means do we approve every pay package that's put in front of us. We have turned down many proposals.
How many of those 69 did you turn down last year?
In our packages for last year, we required many increases in long-term restricted stock. We denied virtually every request for increased cash salary last year. We did not, AIG did not ask for any net increase in compensation. AIG asked for a net decrease in compensation.
Okay.
Their pay proposals, their one raise that they requested was more than offset by the pay decreases that they proposed for other people.
Yeah, but this year AIG is not even still in the program. My time has expired. I now go to, I believe, the gentleman from Virginia, and then we'll go next to the gentleman from North Carolina. Mr. Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And welcome to both of our witnesses. Ms. Gagan, by the way, did TARP lose money for the taxpayers of the United States?
Congressman Connolly, TARP has been a great success. So it's very difficult to answer that question. We have not yet received back all of the investments made under TARP, but we have received back an incredibly large number of them, I believe roughly 93% of the investments. But overall, TARP itself was an incredible success. It averted a financial calamity and it prevented a second Great Depression.
Now let me ask both you and Ms. Romero, are you familiar with a letter addressed to Mr. Jordan and Mr. Cartwright dated today from Mr. Feinberg? Mr. Chairman, I would ask that this letter be entered into the record. I thank the Chair. He makes 2 points in response to queries from the subcommittee. And the reason you haven't seen it is he only got our letter yesterday. But he says, the pay prescriptions promulgated during my tenure at Department of Transportation should be applied in a flexible manner and should not be used to strictly limit each individual executive's compensation. He goes on to say that when one examines the statute, the statutory directive guiding the special master in calculating compensation, he says there are different statutes that are conflicting. He says, for example, well, there are conflicting statutory directives. For example, make sure that Treasury compensation decisions ensure the ongoing competitiveness of those companies. subject to Treasury oversight, while also making sure that such pay decisions promote overall company economic growth and avoid excessive risk. These conflicting directives guarantee the special master must exercise a fair amount of discretion in deciding compensation. The second point he makes is that the circumstances that existed in 2009 are different than the circumstances that exist today, and therefore they have to be taken into account in terms of current actions by the special master. He says compensation decisions made by the special master must take into account this fact in making individual compensation decisions that will ensure ongoing competitiveness in the marketplace. Would you comment on the 2 points he's making? One, that there's, apparently before I got here, there were even some allusions to the breaking of the law. Ms. Romero, I assume that the Special Inspector General doesn't concur with that. You found no breaking of the law, did you?
No, I found a lack of adherence to the Office of the Special Master's own guidelines.
And well, that's what you say, but here is one of the special masters of all special masters saying, well, first of all, there's conflicting statutory guidance here, and the special master has to try to navigate his or her way through this conflicting statutory guidance.
Sure. I'm very happy to talk about that. So because there's conflicting statutes, there's a lot of discretion in the Office of the Special Master. And what we have said is come up with the criteria, because that's what's necessary for consistency, transparency, and effective oversight. You've got to set some standards, and this is why our initial recommendations were so important. Tell us what the criteria is that under which you're going to make decisions for who gets a pay raise, for who gets cash over $500,000. And without the criteria, there's no way to have effective oversight. And I would think this committee, as an oversight committee, would want that. But I want to raise the competitive point. The competitive part that you raised of the marketplace is already embedded in the guidelines if they're followed, because
Wait. You just said there weren't any guidelines.
No, I said there were guidelines. They weren't adhered to. So the competitive...
Well, I heard you say come up with guidelines.
He came up, well, criteria. So he came up with guidelines, 3 guidelines that I mentioned in my opening. But what we said is there's no criteria or policies and procedures to ensure those guidelines are met. And the market, and what happens with the market, is already embedded in those guidelines if they're adhered to, because pay is supposed to not exceed 50% of what their peers are. So that already takes into account rising tides.
All right, I'm running out of time. And, Mr. Chairman, could I ask for just 30 or 40 more seconds to ask Ms. Gagan to respond? I thank the Chair. Ms. Gagan, what about Ms. Romero's point that, they've been asking for criteria to go along with guidelines, and your office has failed to provide such criteria, which compromises transparency?
Thank you, Congressman Connolly. We have our guidelines. Our guidelines are extremely useful ways of implementing the somewhat conflicting principles under the Treasury regulations. But we try to carry out all those principles, and that's why we have our guidelines. The fact is, as Mr. Feinberg would tell you, we have to exercise discretion. We have to exercise judgment in looking at the exact facts and circumstances of each executive and each company. That's what the principles say, and that is what we do.
But what about Ms. Romero's criticism that you have yet to adopt clear criteria that all of us can then measure and see whether you're abiding by them reasonably or not?
Thank you. Congressman Connolly, we believe that that if you were to look at our determination letters, we explain how we view market data. We explain our policies and procedures, which are incredibly robust. We explain all of how we go about examining all of the information that the companies submit. We believe that we have adequate policies and procedures for making the decisions that we have to make. On the point of raises, if I might address that briefly, it's important to understand we do not always approve raises, but it's also important to understand that the companies are constantly evaluating the performance of their executives, and with respect to some executives, they give them promotions, they give them added responsibilities, and that's why in some cases pay raises are totally justified. In other instances, it is not unusual for them to come to us and to suggest that executives receive a pay decrease. So I think you have to think of things in terms of the real packages that we see. It's not a question of the companies coming to us and simply asking for pay raises. Those pay raises are related to things like promotions and added responsibilities.
My time is up, and I thank the Chairman for his indulgence.
Thank you, John. Real quick before going to the gentleman from North Carolina, Ms. Romero, of the request for pay above $500,000, as you evaluated what the special master did last year, of those requests, how many did they turn down and say, no, you cannot make above $500,000?
I think it was only a couple. I can get you the.
Couple out of how many?
So there was 23 given.
So 23 out of 25.
I think it was either. I think it was.
Or excuse me, 2 out of 25 they turned down. They accepted 20.
I think it was 3. I think the number was 3 that were turned down and 23 that were given.
And did they take them from $500,000 down to $499,999, or what did they do?
Basically everyone gets cash of $450,000 or more.
Oh, so this is not like they're going way down. They're just dropping them $1 or $2.
94%.
Again, making them uncomfortable so that we don't have this continue.
Right.
I got it. I got it.
Well, and given some skin in the game. I mean, that's why you want to limit cash. You want an employee to have some skin in the game, not be paid for just showing up.
I was being sarcastic, but yeah, sometimes it doesn't work. The gentleman from North Carolina.
My sarcasm often doesn't work. But thank you both for your service to our government and to the American people. The question for you, Ms. Romero, is in light of my colleague's questions, Mr. Connolly's questions. So what you outline is, as an Inspector General, as a Special Inspector General for TARP, you're there to critique the program to make sure the American people are taken care of and the taxpayer isn't further put the screws to, that there's transparency, there's consistency, you have a rules-based approach rather than an ad hoc approach. What you outline in your report today is that the Special Paymaster doesn't have a consistent application of the rules and guidelines that they have outlined, and furthermore, they're overly broad in the guidelines they use, which gives them such great discretion. Obviously, they disagree. This is very often the case with Inspector Generals when they put critiques out. This is not uncommon based on the experience that I know you've had with this program for the last 5 years. Now, I ask this question because doesn't that ad hoc basis raise and up the ante on moral hazard? Now, many of us disagreed with the bailouts, and I certainly appreciate Ms. Gagan's saying TARP was a great success. Now, the fact is the taxpayer at current accounting is going to lose about $70 billion on TARP. I appreciate you saying it's a great success. I appreciate you upping the ante. I know it's your responsibility as an administration official to defend this administration. You've done a yeoman's task today, even to the point where when you called TARP a great success, I laughed. It wasn't a snicker. It was actually a genuine laugh. It's ridiculous, but that's your perspective. The question I have for the American people and for the taxpayer, Ms. Romero, why does this matter? It's 69 people getting paid. It's how many companies now?
3.
3.
Well, 2 for 2013.
All right, who cares? Why does this matter? Tell me why it matters.
2 reasons. 1, you're paying for it. That's the first reason. So if there's excessive compensation, all taxpayers are subsidizing it. Then there's a more important reason, which is executive compensation played a material role in causing the financial crisis. When you have high cash, when you don't use long-term restricted stock tied to individual pay performance, you risk returning back to the very type of pay that got so out of hand that it caused these companies to nearly collapse, and all of us had to step in.
So it's not the principles outlined by the original Special Paymaster, Mr. Feinberg, that's the issue. It's their unwillingness to put a rules-based approach to judging these pay packages is your critique.
Right. I mean, I think applying those guidelines, Mr. Feinberg said, was supposed to get that balance where you don't have excessive compensation, but the companies keep competitive. You rip away those guidelines, you chip away at those guidelines, all you're left with is the companies in the ear of the special master saying this is what we want, and we're seeing more and more each year as time goes by that the companies are getting more and more and more of what they want.
So you reference in your report that both Citi and Bank of America exited TARP faster in an accelerated way based on the pay restrictions.
Right.
So it does have an impact on getting people off the taxpayer dime and getting them back to independent entities again, does it not? Absolutely. Okay. So look, the question here is not about private sector pay, right? As you mentioned, say on pay by shareholders, I think that's an important principle that we adhere to. Now, what I'm concerned about is American people and the taxpayer being on the hook for this pay. We've set up, we've written the law in such a way that we should have principles adhered to by the special paymaster. And I would hope that your office, Ms. Gagan, would actually read the report, look at ways that you can change and improve, and actually stand up for the American people and the taxpayers that are paying not only your freight and my freight, but still own the greater portion of these companies. Now, final question, and just so we have this on the record, how much has TARP been paid back from General Motors?
From General Motors, about half. It was $50 billion. They're still owed about it's around $20 billion. I want to also point out, because I think this was raised earlier, the government expects a loss in TARP, and about $20 to $25 billion of that is in the auto companies.
Thank you, and thank you for noting that for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership.
I thank you. Gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this. What is amazing about this discussion, and I have been in Washington now all of probably 8 weeks, as I was told, though, however, on January the 3rd, I became part of the problem. So what I will fight back on, though, is the fact that I believe that we're all in this. And I think, Mr. Mayor, you made the comment just a minute ago why this is important. It says you're paying for it. I think that just needs to be the theme that we hit here all along, is that we lose track in the numbers and the guidelines and everything else about who actually and why actually this is important. Because there's a trust factor out there, if you've not noticed. People don't trust us anymore. They don't trust us on the level to spend their money properly. They don't trust us to get the budget straight. They don't trust us on so many different levels. And then when we come to an issue like this, it is amazing. One of the other things that I've been amazed about since I came here is hyperbole. Ms. Gagan, to say that TARP was this excessive and just great success and that it avoided the next Great Depression, I'm just curious here, did it also cure the common cold? Did it also do all these other great things? Hyperbole here does not help us. It had good, you know, the administration wants to say that it was this and explain that, and as my colleague said, that that is your opinion and you're having to sit here and endure this. The questions that I have, though, is when we, and sort of the basis of it, is when we endure the issue of lack of adherence to guidelines, we don't follow the rules, or we make them up as we go, or really what I think it is time sort of cures all ills. In other words, time is progressing here. People get tired of hearing about this. And so it becomes very easy for the special master to listen and say, well, maybe we need to approve this. The concern, however, for me is this. When you look at the question, and you've stated you understand the 50% guidelines, Gagan, is that correct? You understand that process. However, we've overexceeded on several occasions, and I'll just use several lightly.
Congressman Collins, I'd like to clarify, we satisfy the guidelines as we've applied them to AIG, GM, and Ally Financial. We apply the same benchmark we've always applied to those three companies.
But you over 50% on the 50% rule, 63% of the time in 2012, you approved overage.
Congressman Collins, the way we apply
and answer the question. Did you do it over 63% of the time?
There is a range of compensation. The average of the compensation, the guideline is not do we exceed it. The guideline is do the packages as a whole at the particular company average to the benchmark. That includes, as we describe in our determination letters, that means that some of the pay packages are above and some are below, but the average is at our benchmark. That is how we have always applied the guideline for market forces.
Well, it seems like the averages that we're applying to always get, for the most part, are always on the side of approving. I mean, we're continuing this process. And again, one of the things that was brought up as we talked about it from a perspective of this being, I would say the taxpayer funding this, is that we still have the government is still on significant hook especially at GM and Ally, in a rate that we're not going to get paid back, that at the stock prices and others, that we're in for this. And I think what actually happens here is time progresses. And this is my concern. And it's been talked about here many times, of the fact that the guidelines and the adherence to those guidelines. You made an interesting comment. I'll just have to ask, I'm not sure. You mentioned pay decreases. How many of you approved pay decreases? This was in your own testimony just a few minutes ago.
Congressman Collins, the AIG last year when we were in the pay packages that they proposed, the pay decreases that they proposed well outweighed the one pay increase that they requested. In the case of Ally Financial, the pay decreases that they proposed outweighed the pay increases that they requested. Neither of those companies asked for a net pay increase in 2012.
Well, I think the problem we have here is they become comfortable in the situation in which they're in. They become comfortable where they are at. There is no incentive for them to get out of this and to find a way to pay this back or to get back, because they become very comfortable. They can understand, well, if we do a little decrease here, get a little increase here, it begins to weigh out, and nobody's paying attention. Mr. Romero, I have a question for you in the short time left. Who will safeguard the taxpayers' money tied up in TARP if it's not the special master?
That's the question. I'll try. I'll do my best. Our entire office of SIGTARP will do our best, but we're not the ones making the decisions.
Because right now it looks like there is one, and is your own comment just a minute ago, the company's in the ear, the company's making the progress, and that in the end, we're sort of left on the hook with what the special master in this, quote, confusion of rules and guidelines. I think the problem we have here, Mr. Chairman, and I know we're coming to an end, but this is the problem I have. The American people go to work every day, they look at these issues, and they understand things that are gray at times, but they also understand process. They also understand rules. And what they do not want to hear from us is a continual guideline, well, the rule says this, the statute differs here. Look, the American people are on the tax line for this. They're paying for it. They're frustrated by it. And to come before this committee and say, well, we've done it here and we didn't do it here, and simply the guidelines are out of whack, that's not acceptable. And the taxpayer's paying for it. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. You're exactly right. The American people, what they hate is when they're told one thing and they see something else happen. The President said top executives at firms receiving extraordinary help from the United States taxpayers will have their compensation capped at $500,000. Mr. Biden always wanted to have a statement for the public, said, I'd like to throw these guys in the brig. This is all back when the government was convincing the American people they needed to pony up their tax dollars to bail out companies that were failing. And then, of course, the Treasury Secretary said base cash salary should rarely exceed $500,000 and should be, in many cases, well under $500,000. Well, we've heard from testimony today that's just not happening. The trend is exactly the opposite direction. 6 executives in 2009, when there were 7 companies in this exceptional assistance category, only 6 executives received pay above $500,000. Today it's 23, and we're only focusing on 2 companies today. So the trend has been like this when the President said no one should be receiving a compensation package above $500,000. And the trend is exactly the opposite direction. And we also heard from Ms. Romero today. She said, in fact, those who are below $500,000, they're right next to the ceiling. They're all making $450,000, $480,000, $499,999.99. That's where they're all at. And yet, Mr. Geithner, who's your boss, Ms. Gagan, said it should be, in many cases, well under $500,000. So Mr. Collins is exactly right. The American taxpayers are like, we were told X and we're getting Y, and we're sick of it. We're sick of it from the politicians, and we're certainly sick of it from other people who were paying their salary to do their job. And frankly, Ms. Gagan, you're not doing it. You're not doing it, and you're not doing it with companies they're bailing out in the process. Ally Financial, 74% owned by the American taxpayer, and their subsidiary ResCap going bankrupt, you just approved their CEO's compensation packages, a package of over $500,000. So it's like, what the heck is going on here? And it's no wonder Ms. Romero is ready to pull her hair out and so frustrated, because for several years now she said, get your act together, at least set some standards. Tell us how you're making this thing work, or how you're going to make it work. It's just not. In fact, how do you determine what the market rate is and what that median price? How do you determine that? What's the process in place that you have?
Chairman Jordan, we gather an enormous amount of market data. We have in-house executive compensation professionals to
Do you get some of the, is some of the data given to you by the very companies you're overseeing?
From the beginning, we have given companies instructions as to exactly what we need in terms of market data. And
so you're relying on the very company, Ally, the company 74% owned by the taxpayers, a subsidiary gone bankrupt. You rely on some of the information they give you to determine what the market price is?
we give them.
Is that what they do, Ms. Romero?
Yes.
That's exactly what they do?
Yes.
Well, no wonder you're approving everything. So they get to be the judge, jury, and the decider in the whole thing, and they're the very company getting the taxpayer dollars in the first place. So they're saying, you know what, we think the average is here, and oh, by the way, this is what we want to be paid, and they give you the information, and you check it off. Well, how's the taxpayer being protected in that formula?
Chairman Jordan, I'd like to clarify. From the beginning, we have asked the companies they have the best access to the broadest and most comprehensive market data. Our executive compensation professionals have explained to them exactly what they need, and our professionals are.
This is amazing. This is like me asking when my kids get in trouble, me asking, what kind of punishment do you want? I mean, this is amazing. I mean, frankly, I didn't realize it was this bad. That you're asking Ally, 74% owned by the taxpayer, subsidiary, you're asking them, give us the information that shows us what you should be paid, and we'll make a decision,
Congressman
and we'll
Jordan,
see your recommendation.
We have the expertise to evaluate that market data.
You got the experts who take all the information from the very people you're supposed to be overseeing, and you're saying they're so expert that they can determine that oh, that's not going to work. And yet, we just heard from Ms. Romero, you're approving almost every compensation package they ask for. Well, of course, they're giving you the data to make the decision.
Chairman Jordan, we actually have the ability to evaluate the market data. We spend an enormous amount of time doing that. We do spend an enormous amount of due diligence and
Ms. Romero, this is frustrating. Ms. Romero, how I've characterized it, is that accurate?
The companies, yes, the companies give market data. So, for example, for 2012, while the Office of the Special Master looked at that market data, they went with the company's determination of the companies and the 50th percentile. And there's another important point here. When you look at the companies that are in the peer groups, for example, for AIG, the companies are picking those. That's J.P. Morgan Chase is in the peer group. Other large banks. I mean, they set the peer groups. And one of the things Special Master Feinberg testified is before Congress, in that competitive market data that the companies send, he said the companies were asking for more and more and more, and that was his congressional testimony.
Yeah. What's the remedy? I mean, they're not going to, obviously they're not going to listen to you, and we know GM and Ally are going to be in this for a while. They're not, you know, we know what's happening with the stock, that they're going to be here. So what's the remedy? You know, time and time again, I read your testimony where you over and over again you said, come on, listen to me. You set some standards, do something. 4 years, I mean, how do we get after this? So we're going to have to look at some legislation and try to.
I have 7 recommendations, and the remedy is to get those 7 recommendations implemented every year, to relook at it.
But I read your recommendations. Yeah. I get it. But what I'm saying is, are we going to have to look at legislation, introduce legislation, try to pass something to make this office accountable to the taxpayer?
The fact of the matter is, every time an IG puts out a report and puts out recommendations, an agency has an opportunity. They have 2 choices. They can completely ignore them and end up in the same situation that caused the report in the first place.
And is that what you believe they've done?
So far.
Okay.
Now, or what they can do is they can say, we're going to implement every single one of those recommendations and work with you to do it in a way that's done right. And that's what should happen.
And that's what should happen, not based solely on your good work, but that's what should happen based on what the leaders of our government told the American people they were going to do when they started this program. Absolutely. So it's not just your good work at your office, which has been exceptional. It's because that's what the people in charge of our government told the American taxpayer they were going to do, and it's not being done.
Absolutely. And also, those guidelines were developed in the public's interest. So if they're not going to be adhered to, how is the public's interest going to be implemented? Okay,
Ms. Gagan, who's your direct boss at Treasury?
Ultimately, I report to the Secretary of the Treasury.
Okay, and can you let me know, as the White House and as Mr. Geithner said that this stuff was okay, has the White House communicated to you through Mr. Geithner in a direct fashion saying it's okay to see this trend where more and more executives are getting their pay approved above the $500,000 mark? I mean, what kind of communication have you had with the White House, if any?
Chairman Jordan, I have not had any communications with the White House.
Has Mr. Geithner expressed any communications to you about this program that he's had with the White House?
No, he has not.
And is your direct boss, Mr. Mossad, is it Tim Mossad?
Yes, that's
Has
correct.
he expressed any indication that he's communicated with some of the White House Chief of Staff, someone at the White House, or with Mr. Geithner that about this program?
Chairman Jordan, he has not, but may I clarify that the Office of the Special Master is an independent office in Treasury.
But you said your boss was Mr. Mossad, right? Who's he work for?
I do brief the Assistant Secretary.
And he's in the Treasury, right? He's employed by the Treasury.
But
yeah.
the decisions are made by the Special Master. They were made by.
How about Mr. Liu today? Have you any conversations Mr. Liu has had with you or Mr. Mossad relative to this program?
I'm not aware of any.
So the President goes on national television, talks about no one should be paid above $500,000, and yet they don't even talk to you about the fact that now we got all these people who are paid, and the trend is this direction, and everyone who's below $500,000 is right next to $500,000. No conversations at all with the White House about this?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Man, we do need some controls put in place. The taxpayers are surely getting a bum deal here. With that, I will yield to the gentlelady from Wyoming, then I'll come back to Mr. Cartwright for his second round.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following on the Chairman's line of questioning, Ms. Gagan, why not have an independent evaluation of these salaries, since they are being funded by taxpayers in no small part rather than private sector, and since the New York Wall Street establishment has a network that sort of perpetuates a belief that what they do is worth more than what other people do. Why not have an independent evaluation? You know, I managed billions of dollars when I was Wyoming State Treasurer, and I got paid $92,000 a year. And I was managing, $8 billion at the time. Why not have an independent evaluation of when taxpayer money is involved of these kinds of salaries?
Congresswoman, I believe that's what the Office of the Special Master is there to do. And we do an enormous amount of due diligence. We spend an enormous amount of time gathering market data and evaluating it.
But is the market data using only the private sector money management as its standard? Because as I said, I was managing public money, and I was paid by the public. And we're responsible for taxpayer money that bailed out private businesses. So no longer are we really talking about a private sector model. We're talking about the taxpayers being invested in this company and expecting that we will have oversight over how that money is handled. So when we only use a private sector model that's generated by their so-called peers like J.P. Morgan, that's really not a peer group for the situation that exists. So why not go outside? Why not do independent evaluators?
Congresswoman, the Office of the Special Master takes its responsibility as steward of taxpayer investments in these companies very carefully. We have worked hard at determining which are the correct comparator companies, and we have told these companies—
But they're companies, right? See, here's the problem. When I was State Treasurer, getting paid $92,000 a year, I was managing billions of dollars, but it was taxpayer money, and the taxpayers were paying me. And I would suggest to you, since when I started as State Treasurer, we had $3.5 billion, and when I finished as a term-limited State Treasurer, we had over $8 billion, that I was responsible, very prudent, in the manner in which I managed taxpayer dollars for $92,000 a year. Why isn't that part of the pool state treasurers that are managing billions of dollars. Connecticut state treasurer manages billions of dollars. North Carolina state treasurer does. Not all do, but there were a handful of us that managed billions. Why is not those public employees, why are they not part of the so-called market in this instance, where it is the hardworking taxpayers' money that has bailed out these companies, and not using a peer group that includes other Wall Street businesses that were not bailed out?
Congresswoman, if we take, for example, AIG is in the private sector, and its competitors include companies like MetLife, like Aetna, like Prudential. They include financial services companies like American Express. These are the people against, these are the businesses against which they compete, and these are the businesses from whom they recruit their employees.
And I understand that, but they're not competing on a level playing field right now. The playing field, they are not the peer group anymore because the taxpayers bailed them out. Now, if we'd allowed them to go the way of Lehman Brothers, I would absolutely agree with you. If the moral hazard had been executed, I would absolutely agree with you. I think Barclays should be paying the people it kept after Lehman Brothers was acquired by Barclays. Then I would agree with you. That is the peer group from which they're hiring. But they're not in the same peer group anymore, because the taxpayers of this country, the little steel worker, the coal worker in my state, bailed out AIG. So it's not the same peer group anymore. And I would suggest to you that, and I respectfully disagree with you, that it's the same peer group. In my opinion, it is not. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, lady, for a good line of questioning. I will yield now to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, and you can have a few more minutes than 5 if you would like, Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, again, thank you to the witnesses for coming today. We look at the big picture here. We roll back the clock to 2008, when we had this enormous, catastrophic financial calamity that occurred in this country and threatened to throw us right back into the worst financial picture since the Great Depression, and maybe worse than the Great Depression. We saw that. We remember that. And in order to avert that, the Federal Government and all of the people at the highest reaches of the Federal Government decided to hold its nose and engage in this TARP program, bailing out huge companies. In the process, obviously, successfully saving millions of middle-class manufacturing jobs for people in all of our districts, jobs for people making cars in this country, people making other things in this country. Those jobs were saved as a result of the TARP program. We held our noses because it cost so much money, so much Federal taxpayer money indebted us so deeply to do that. But it turned out to be a good gamble because we recovered, as Ms. Gagan has said, 93% of this money. And you know, probably the biggest reason that we held our noses while we did that TARP program was that we had to pay the people to run these companies. We had to pay the people to run the companies to make sure that those employees were still employed, making things, building cars, keeping the American economy rolling. We had to pay those people to run the companies so that the taxpayers would get that TARP money back, 93% of which we have got back. We held our noses because you have to pay people who run companies an awful lot of money. That's just the way the market is. Everybody knows that. Mr. Feinberg has said it. The witnesses have said it. So it's an unfortunate situation. It's something that we've been doing a lot of nose holding throughout the whole process. But it's been a success story, and what I want to know, what I really want to establish here is, this is the oversight panel, and the thing that I really care about is whether the law is being followed. Has the law been followed with respect to executive compensation? Now, Ms. Romero, I want to direct this question to you.
Sure.
The standard examined in your report that, quote, total compensation should target the 50th percentile for similarly situated employees at similarly situated entities, and that cash salaries should not exceed $500,000. That's not in the statute, but it's within Mr. Feinberg's, quote, prescriptions, unquote. Am I correct in that?
So, Mr. Cartwright, there's nothing in the TARP statute that talks about anything. If you remember, the TARP statute's October 2008, where TARP was supposed to be getting toxic assets off the books of banks. None of the 13 programs that are in TARP are in the TARP statute other than helping homeowners. I mean, there's nothing in the TARP statute. That's not how Treasury implemented it. Treasury implemented it through guidelines, and as an oversight entity, I have to look at the guidelines they use to implement, and they set the standards, and that's how I have to judge performance. Otherwise, there's no standards at all for the bank bailout. There's zero. There's nothing in the statute.
So they are guidelines or prescriptions, but it's not the law about $500,000 or
what the TARP law says, ESA says that Treasury should implement executive compensation standards, and so that's what the law says. Treasury did implement executive compensation standards, and those are the standards they should be held to. So actually, there is, in broad form, the delegation in the law to Treasury to set the standards.
Now, at a February 25, 2010 Financial Services Committee hearing, Special Master Feinberg explained, and I quote, by application of the principles set forth in Treasury's rule on executive compensation to the facts and circumstances underlying my determinations to date, I have developed a number of generally applicable practical prescriptions, including the following. Guaranteed income is rejected except for cash salaries at sufficient levels to attract and retain employees. These generally should not exceed $500,000 per year except for good cause shown. Total pay should generally not exceed the 50th percentile of total compensation for similarly situated employees, end quote. Now, Ms. Gagan, you have statutory requirements. Your office also has more specific responsibilities dictated by Treasury's interim final rule. Will you please place the Feinberg prescriptions in context for us?
Thank you, Congressman Cartwright. Mr. Feinberg's, what he calls prescriptions, what in all of our determination letters we call either standards or guidelines, were the general rules of thumb that the Office of the Special Master adopted to specifically apply the principles in the interim final rule. There are 6 principles. They're general principles. And in order to make them more specific when we're examining each pay package, the Office of the Special Master came up with what Mr. Feinberg sometimes called prescriptions, but which we usually call guidelines. And those are exactly the guidelines that we continue to use today. We do benchmarking on market data. To make sure that the pay packages do not exceed the level of pay for similar positions at similar companies. We minimize cash pay. We maximize stock pay. We make sure that if there's incentive compensation, it's achieved only on the, it's awarded only on the achievement of pre-established performance goals, and we limit perks. Those were the 5 prescriptions that Mr. Feinberg adopted, and those are the 5 prescriptions or guidelines that we continue to follow today.
Now, what do you believe was the intended use of those prescriptions or standards or guidelines?
Congressman Cartwright, clearly the task under the law of the Office of the Special Master is to achieve a balance between limiting compensation and making sure that pay levels are such that companies can compete, can succeed, and will repay the taxpayer. And that is, I think, a look at our record shows that that is, in fact, what we have achieved and what we have accomplished. And these 7 companies have done that, and today we expect significant additional returns from our investments in both GM and Ally Financial.
The executives receiving the compensation that you're overseeing and approving, were all of them around? Are these people who were responsible for the financial mess in the first place?
Congressman Cartwright, I appreciate very much the opportunity to address that point. All 3 CEOs at these companies were hired by these companies after the taxpayers had made their investments in these companies. All 3 CEOs were hired in order to reform the companies, to restructure them, to lead them forward. And the top 25 individuals at each of the 3 companies whose pay packages we reviewed in 2012, virtually none of those people were there as in 2009, for example. Almost all of those people have been promoted into those positions, or in a few cases, they have been newly hired. So we're talking about the people who are leading the companies, who are producing the results, and who are working toward the return of the taxpayer investment. Those are the people that we are evaluating, and we're not paying for failure. We're paying for their successful management of these companies.
And now finally, I don't think I say it too strongly, Ms. Gagan, when I say that there have been accusations leveled at you that you've rolled back application of guidelines aimed at curbing excessive pay. How do you respond to that?
I think Congressman Cartwright, in my oral testimony, I went point by point through each of the 5 guidelines or prescriptions and showed exactly how, if you look at our numbers, if you look at our actual record carefully, it's clear that we have satisfied each of those guidelines in the 2012 determinations, and we will satisfy them in the 2013 determinations as well.
Thank you so much. I'll yield back my time.
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Gagan, when we played the President's statement, he said top executives at firms receiving extraordinary help from United States taxpayers will have their compensation capped at $500,000. He did not say top executives at firms receiving extraordinary help from U.S. taxpayers will have their compensation capped at $500,000 unless it's a new CEO or a new employee at the company. So the standard, I mean, we had this discussion about what the law is, how Treasury interprets the laws and how the guidelines work and all, but the fact is the statement, and it was sold to the American people on a simple premise. We're capping it at $500,000. We don't care if, he didn't say, oh, but if there's a new guy who comes in or a new lady who comes in this position, this position, this position, oh, but forget that. We'll make up our standard then and we'll let them make more than $500,000 and we won't look at it and we'll go from 6 out of 7 companies. He didn't say that, did he?
No, sir, he didn't.
So the same standard applies, right, regardless of who's running the company?
Well, that standard was not incorporated into the statute when
the standard has not changed. The Treasury rules are the same, regardless if it's a new person who comes. So the person who was there in 2009, or for someone else, the same standard applies, correct? Ms. Romero, does the same standard apply?
Absolutely. It's Treasury standard.
Exactly. So this idea that, well, we've got different people run the company, so now it's different, that just, I think, just proves what Ms. Romero has been saying for several years, that there's not a guidelines that you guys have in place that you can objectively determine what the standard really is.
May I address that?
Yeah. The simple question is, well, Mr. Mayor, do you think they've listened to anything at all, any of the suggestions you've given over the last several years? Has the Special Master taken any of your advice, any of your counsel, and implemented it in how they decide executive compensation?
Nothing meaningful.
And Ms. Gagan, why is well, first, I assume maybe you would disagree, but why haven't you done that? Do you not like him? Do you think, well, what the heck, we don't have to? I'm the boss here. I mean, what's the reason for not, like, they seem like pretty smart folks over there. They're giving you suggestions. It seems to be clear to me that there's been a trend in a direction of it giving more and more executives compensation above $500,000. Why haven't you taken any of the recommendations to heart and implemented them?
Chairman Jordan, I'd like to clarify that point. We understand the importance of diligent oversight, and we have benefited from SIG-TARP's review of our work. However, we do have very robust policies and procedures. I hope today we've made the case that we continue to follow those policies and procedures and guidelines. We have actually implemented, if I may say so.
Sure.
We have implemented several of SIG-TARP's recommendations, and we're in the process of considering others. But we have fully implemented a number of them, and I'm surprised to hear that—
The lady beside you is shaking her head pretty strongly no. Mr. Mayor, would you disagree with that?
8 recommendations. One's been implemented, and that was to keep better documentation of their use of market data. That's it.
The market data that they get from the companies that they're overseeing, correct?
And how they look at it. So
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. We said substantiate why someone should be paid cash salary over $500,000. What they did was maintain an 8-page spreadsheet which gives the reasons for that, which largely parrot what the companies say. Well, we didn't say better document it. We said substantiate, meaning there's got to be a real independent analysis.
So do you, I mean, I'm glad you raised that point because I wanted to get into this. Here's the document we received, which justification for exceeding $500,000 recommended by Executive Compensation Committee. So this is a document we got from one of the companies, and basically all it says is it has everything blocked out except the employee ID number. So employee 4859 gets, they're recommending a cash package of $1.7 million. Employee 2986, they're recommending $850,000. Employee 5021, they're recommending $875,000. So I hope, I mean, this is what we got. I hope you're getting more than that. Or frankly, I hope they're getting more than that when they're making their decision. But it can't be this bad, I assume, for you guys. There's got to be some justification. Now, one of the things we did get is we got, and this is in the 2012, employee performance goals, some of the stuff that wasn't redacted. We got statements like move the organization to be market and consumer-driven company. I guess that's versus a government-driven company. Optimize and manage complexity, improve these goals, I have no idea what they mean. I mean, my background—
The goals really don't matter because they're only tied to long-term restricted stock, and it's been removed for half of the employees.
Okay.
So that's the pay for individual performance through the long-term restricted stock has been removed for every single Ally employee and some of the GM employees and some of the AIG employees. So most of them actually don't have any goals.
So no goals at all, let alone vaguely written ones like this?
Non-individual goals, no.
I mean, I was telling the staff the other day when I first looked at it, I was like, I remember my background coaching, working with student athletes, and one of the things we do at the start of every season, we say, write down your goal for this season. And we said, we don't want this baloney, I'm going to be the best I can or have the best. We want, like, do you want to be a national champ? Do you want to be an All-American? You want to make the varsity? What's your goal? I mean, pretty specific. This is, I have no idea what this is. But back to the first question, it can't be this bad for you, right?
We get information. So we see—
How much of what you get is redacted and blocked out?
No, we do not get anything redacted.
So you get to see the full thing? Okay.
We get to see the full thing, and that's how—
But is it still kind of this generic language that I just cited here, some of this sort of warm and fuzzy language?
We see the language, and then we do interviews, and we try to see sort of why did somebody get a raise, for example, and when we see the explanations from the companies and we see the explanations from the Office of Special Master, and what we found is the Office of Special Master's reasoning largely parroted the reasoning of the companies.
So they're giving you the same, you're getting the same statement from the Special Master that you're getting from the companies, and the Special Master makes a decision on information they get from the companies, the very companies the taxpayers are bailing out.
Yes.
Such a deal, such a deal. Ms. Gagan, do you want to comment on any of that?
Chairman Jordan.
Well, let's go back to the first question. Why 1 of 8, and it was just more documents, why haven't you looked at some of the other recommendations that repeatedly have been given to you by the SIG-TARP?
Well, Chairman Jordan, our view is that we fully—
And do you make that decision, or does Mr. Massad, or does Mr. Geithner, or now Mr. Liu, who makes that decision? Is that ultimately your decision?
It's my decision, yes.
And do you have to clear it with them and let them know what you're doing? Do you have to, I mean, once you make the decision, do you inform them? Do they get some notice of that?
I certainly do inform them before we go out with a determination letter.
Okay, so 8 recommendations you've been given by SIGTARP. You've implemented 1, just this thing on documents. And when you do that or fail to do the other 7, you let Mr. Massad know that. I assume he lets Mr. Liu now know that, or Mr. Geithner previously. Ever any feedback from those guys?
Chairman Jordan, in the Treasury, there is actually a checklist as to where these recommendations stand. So we do keep track of whether we are or are not following up on any of SIGTARP's recommendations. And let me say, we are always open to improving our policies and procedures, and we are currently considering some of these new recommendations that have come from SIGTARP.
Well, that's great to hear that you're going to consider them in the future. I mean, it's been 5 years, repeated requests to do things different, and we got the same old thing. The last thing I'll say, and then we'll go to Mr. Horsford. If my math is right, so in 2009 you had 7 companies, so that's potentially 100 top 25 executives. So that's potentially 175 individuals who could potentially receive pay or compensation above cash compensation above $500,000. And 6 were okay to receive that kind. Now, it may have been a lower number than 175, but potentially it could have been 175. And only 6 were allowed. And again, this is what I think people are seeing here is today you're down to 2 companies, and it's 23. So potentially 50, and you're given 23. So almost half now, where before someone can do the percentage, 6 out of 175 is a pretty low percentage, and now it's 23 out of potentially 50. That's the trend the taxpayer is seeing. That's the trend Ms. Romero, that's the trend we're seeing as part of the Oversight Committee. That's what concerns us. Gentleman from Nevada is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Ms. Gagan, let me ask you, the Office of the Special Masters is governed by the interim final rule on TARP executive compensation. Is that correct?
Yes, Congressman, it is.
Thank you. And that rule is very explicit in the principles your office is required to consider when approving or modifying executive compensation packages, correct?
Yes, sir.
So could you explain then the requirements of the rule and the principles that you are explicitly directed to balance?
There are 6 principles, and 2 of the most important are that compensation should be consistent with and not excessive, taking into account amounts paid for similar positions at similar companies. Another is that compensation should be structured in a way that keeps the companies competitive so that they can attract and retain employees who will contribute to the success of the company and will, so that the company will be able to repay the taxpayer. There are focuses on discouraging structures that would lead to excessive risk-taking. There is a principle focusing on stock-based compensation so that the compensation will ultimately reflect the performance of the company. There is a principle relating to having some combination of short-term and long-term and other elements of compensation. And finally, there's a principle making sure that the compensation reflects the contribution of the individual to the success of the company.
Okay. So let me follow up on one principle in the rule, and that's the compensation structure. Let me read what it is. It says, should reflect the need for the TARP recipient to remain a competitive enterprise, to retain and recruit talented employees who will contribute to the TARP recipient's future success, and ultimately to be able to repay TARP obligations. Can you explain some of the challenges or conflicts that this principle may create in making compensation determinations?
Thank you, Congressman. that goes to the main task of our office under the law, which is achieving the balance we need to achieve between limiting compensation on the one hand and the other, making sure that pay is at levels that permit the companies to be competitive and to repay the taxpayer. So we aim to make sure that those pay levels are market-based, not excessive when considering what similar companies pay for similar positions. But on the other hand, we look at the structure to be sure that it doesn't encourage excessive risk-taking. We minimize cash. We maximize stock. We have fundamentally restructured the whole compensation package that is that we generally approve for these employees.
So then, Ms. Gagan, can you then, from your mandate to balance these set of principles when limiting compensation, can you discuss how you arrived at these determinations for GM and AIG specifically in context of these principles, please?
Thank you. I'd be happy to. For all of our pay packages that we approved last year, we looked at those 6 principles that we've described in addition to the 5 guidelines that Mr. Feinberg originally established. Each of the pay packages, if you look at our set of pay packages in 2012, 94% of those pay packages are majority stock. The total amount of cash pay in those pay packages is 63% lower than the median of cash pay for compared to what similar companies pay. We have made sure that the market levels meet our benchmark. In the case of AIG, it was 48th percentile, GM 50th percentile, and Ally Financial midway between 50th percentile and 75th percentile. We have long-term, while there is not a guideline requiring long-term restricted stock, there is a guideline focusing on having a lot of stock-based pay, which we do have. That may be in the form of stock salary and not necessarily long-term restricted stock. Where we do have long-term restricted stock, it is awarded only upon the achievement of pre-established performance goals. And finally, we significantly limit perks. And that describes our pay packages that we approved in 2012.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Ms. Gagan, I want to follow up with you. That one thing that we've talked about is the elimination of bonuses as executive compensation, the elimination of golden parachutes as executive compensation. Those have been done. Is that correct?
Congressman Cartwright, that is correct. On the other hand, I do want to point out that some amount of incentive compensation is permitted under the law and under the interim final rule, and that's for that portion. If we can, we like to have some amount of long-term restricted stock.
And right, and that's where I was headed, Ms. Gagan. You've talked at several points in today's testimony about minimizing the cash compensation and putting an emphasis on stock compensation. Would you again make clear for us why we're doing that?
We want to be sure that the maximum part of the compensation will reflect the performance of the company over time. By having stock that becomes transferable or payable only over a period of 3 years, we feel that this is a structure that makes sure that the executives are not focusing on short-term results and that they are not encouraged to take excessive risks.
So, in essence, their reward is the success of the company that they're running.
Exactly.
Okay. And that's what we want, because these are companies that we need to succeed, not only because they're employing the middle-class people that work there, but also because we need to get back our bailout money.
Exactly. And if I can just point out, in 2012, when we made our AIG determinations, for example, I believe it's the case that that Treasury owned more than 70% of the stock of AIG at the time that we made the 2012 determinations. And we made those determinations based on market data. In December of 2012, AIG exited TARP, and AIG and the Federal Reserve and Treasury received back the entire $182 billion of assistance that AIG had received from the Federal Reserve and from the Treasury, with a total positive return of $22.7 billion. So it's that kind of result that we think that we are working for when we set our pay packages in our determination letter process.
Well, thank you for that. Now, of course, we have Ms. Romero here, who's testified that SIG-TARP has made an awful lot of suggestions that didn't get accepted by your office. Is there are you aware of a legal requirement that you have to take all of SIG-TARP's suggestions for how to structure executive compensation and what to approve and what not to approve?
Congressman Cartwright, I'm not aware of any legal requirement. Nevertheless, we have definitely benefited from SIG-TARP's review of our work. We have made some changes in our policies and procedures simply as a result of the audit process when we are interviewed by SIG-TARP or when we give them information. If I may give an example, it was not a recommendation of SIG-TARP last year. Nevertheless, in our 2012 determination letters, as a result of SIG-TARP's focus on our market data, we incorporated for the first time into all of our determination letters an overview of the market data and our process for evaluating the market data. That, I think, is a definite improvement in our determination letters. They're all available on our website, and we did that as a result of our interaction with SIG-TARP. It was not a specific recommendation of theirs. But as I say, we are always open to improving our policies and procedures.
And we've also heard in today's testimony, I think from Ms. Romero, that your office has been open and forthcoming and transparent with information with SIG-TARP. Is that true?
I certainly hope that that's what they believe. I believe we are totally cooperative with all the interviews they've requested and all of their written questions. I think we give them all the information they ask for in a prompt and cooperative manner. May I just point out also, Congressman Cartwright, that we are very supportive of openness and transparency, and we do have an excellent website, and we have a lot of information on our website, including all our determination letters and fact sheets.
Well, I want to thank you again for coming here today, both of you.
I'm going to do just, if I could, real quickly, Mr. Cartwright, just one other line of questioning. In your questioning with Ms. Gagan, she talked about AIG, and I think one of you said the reward is actually the success of the company in the end. And so I want to pick up on that and go to a subsidiary of Ally, ResCap. ResCap is, I think we talked about this earlier, Ms. Gagan, they're currently filed for bankruptcy. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, and they're, at least the information we were provided, I assume you have the same information, 2013 exceptional assistant justification for top 25 employees with cash salaries greater than $500,000. And on this paper is Mr. Marino, employee ID number is listed, CEO of ResCap. He is going to be paid over $500,000 in cash. His total compensation package, which was again given to us, not redacted, is $8 million. So when you talk about this is a company, again, 74% owned, the parent company Ally, 74% owned by the taxpayers. The justification given on this piece of information that you all have says under the line, justification for exceeding $500,000 in cash salary. Salary at the request of the ResCap Board of Directors. And you guys approved this. Here's a company in bankruptcy, 74% owned by the American taxpayers. And just because the Board of Directors at the company says, you know what, even though we're in bankruptcy, we think our CEO needs to make $500,000 and needs a total pay compensation package of $8 million, and you guys said yes to that, how do you justify that?
Chairman Jordan, in response to that, I'd like to make 2 points. The first one is that a successful resolution of the ResCap legacy mortgage liability situation is an important step before Treasury can continue to receive value for its
Are you going to approve that
in
this?
Ally Financial. If I may,
Go ahead.
Chairman Jordan. Secondly, whatever we approve for the any ResCap employees, all of those amounts are also subject to bankruptcy court approval and the unsecured creditors.
We're not talking about that. We're talking about what you're going to approve. Are you going to approve that?
Well,
You've approved it. You approved his salary in the past. They weren't in great condition before, and you approved it. You're going to approve it now.
I actually can't address specific whether I don't know what they're proposing. We have made some. We have looked preliminarily at their proposals. We are very far from approving anything that they have proposed.
Okay.
We have to do all of our processing work first.
Ms. Romero, do you think a company 74% owned by the taxpayer's subsidiary ResCap with its CEO compensation package of $8 million being proposed, cash assistance over $500,000, do you think that should be approved when we're trying to look at the best interests of taxpayers and this program and getting people out of this program?
No, and let me talk about Ally for just a second, because we issued a report in this past month on Ally. Ally is GMAC. It's a subprime mortgage lender. Ally was taken down literally by its mortgage unit of ResCap, which was a subprime mortgage lender, for all of these years. Ally has continued to fail the Federal Reserve stress tests year after year after year. The ResCap issue, the mortgage liabilities, has been a problem since the start.
Probably the biggest problem for the company.
The biggest problem. It has never been addressed. Ally's CEO called it a millstone around the company's neck. It's now become a millstone around taxpayers' neck. And finally, they finally filed bankruptcy in April 2012 for this company. But at this point, there's no concrete plan how Treasury is going to get out of it. 74% investment. And when I say there's no concrete plan, I mean I go to Treasury and I say, how are you going to get this company back on its feet without taxpayers' assistance? And they'll say, we could sell assets. The company could rebuy the shares, or we could sell the shares on the market. And I said, well, that's just how you dispose of any stock. There's no concrete plan. Which one of those things are you going to do? And the answer is we don't know. So there's no concrete plan at all to get Ally out of TARP.
And all this was understood, where this was heading. It's been common knowledge in the market, and frankly, something that the special master should know, and yet they approved a pretty good compensation package for the CEO of ResCap just last year. Is that correct?
The pay was approved in April 2012, just weeks before ResCap filed bankruptcy, and it included, and I just want to point this out, a $200,000 pay raise for an employee at ResCap. 3 ResCap employees got packages exceeding the 50th percentile, and this is not the amount of the pay package. This is how much it exceeded it by. $1.7 million, $1.2 million, $850,000.
To cut to the chase, the special master allowed pay increases to take place with a company 74% owned by the taxpayers on the verge of bankruptcy. The night before bankruptcy, they allowed pay raises to take place with the top executives at that company.
And exceeding the 50th percentile.
And exceeding the 50th. So even exceeding the average in the industry. Amazing. I have nothing further. I want to thank both our we will follow up, Ms. Romero. We think there's got to be a better way to deal with this, and so we want to thank you both. I know it's been, I promised 2 hours, and look at that, a member of Congress only 3 minutes past the deadline, so that's not too awful bad. Thank you. You've both been very good. We appreciate that. The committee is adjourned.